Friends, welcome to this Good Friday service. It is April 10th, the year of our Lord 2020, and we are going through a very dark time. There is a pandemic that is affecting millions of people. Millions of people are sick, so sick that some people are dying from this coronavirus. We and all human beings, regardless of race, ethnicity, class, politics, language, gender identity, or sexual orientation, we are all in touch with our own vulnerability, our lack of control, our mortality, and our fears. This is a very dark time. I am keenly aware this Holy Week that the magnitude of this pandemic and the magnitude of the needs around us are so enormous that the words that I try to say about this as a preacher, those words are woefully inadequate, imperfect, and insufficient. But I will try and share something meaningful tonight, nonetheless, to help us frame this darkness in a way that may be helpful and encouraging. As an act of faithful defiance, and as an act of peace and spiritual nourishment, I invite you to light a candle. I invite you to go even now, put this on pause for a moment and go and get a candle, light it, bring it in. You might want to turn off the lights in the room in which you are right now and just have that candle light as a metaphor. I'll wait for you. Go ahead. Go ahead. It is good to be in the darkness together, in solidarity with one another, and in solidarity with people throughout the world who are going through this darkness. A Christian in the 12th century named Francis, who came from the town of Assisi, knew darkness in his world and time as well. He said, "All the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of one single candle." The candles that light our rooms tonight are metaphors, reminders that all of the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of one candle, let alone the light of Christ. The Psalms were words that Jesus often came back to in his own life and ministry, and he surely knew Psalm 27, verse 1, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" I want to invite us to practice something tonight, to simply gaze at the candle that is lit in your own home and repeat the words of Psalm 27, verse 1 with me. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? as we reflect on the work of Christ on the cross tonight on this Good Friday, let us sing together that old and familiar hymn, Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross, and let us sing this as an opening prayer.
Jesus, keep me near the cross, near a precious fountain, free to all the healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, a trembling soul, love and mercy found me. There the bright and morning star sheds its beams around me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, O Lamb of God, breathe its scenes before me. Help me walk from day to day with its shadow o'er me. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Near the cross, I'll watch and wait, trusting ever, till I reach the golden strand, just beyond the river. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river.
Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for your presence with us, even now, in each of our homes. We ask your blessing on each of us as we worship you this night. We ask your blessing on our family and loved ones wherever they are. We give thanks for your call in our lives to be the church for such a time as this. Help us, each in our own way, to be brave and faithful followers of Jesus. When we are afraid, we ask that you would grant us your peace. When we are confused, we ask that you would grant us clarity. And when we don't even know how to pray, we trust, O God, that you are praying within us in groans that are too deep for words, as the scripture says. In the silence, we lift our prayers to you, trusting that you are already at work. God, we give thanks for your blessing. We ask your continued blessings on those who are living with COVID-19 and those who are caring for them. Bless those who are on the front lines with your grace and your peace. And now bless us as we listen to your word in the scriptures and the narrative of this holy evening.
Matthew 27, verses 11 through 14. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amused.
Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children."
So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry the cross.
And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews."
Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by deriding him shake their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross."
In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, I am the Son of God. In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
Now, from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, This man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and put it on the reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him.
Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many.
Now when the centurion and those with him, who were keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, Truly, this man was God's Son. Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb.
The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. Take a guard, Pilate answered. Go, make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard.
I want to thank those who read scriptures by candlelight. Not an easy thing to do. But thank you for telling some of the story of Christ's passion on the cross, part of the story of our salvation. But our salvation history doesn't start at the cross. It starts with the incarnation itself. It starts with God's decision long ago to become a human being in Jesus the Christ, to walk this earth in solidarity with us, to walk in solidarity with humankind of every generation, to know love and fear, sorrow and joy, life and death and resurrection. There are connections between the birth of Jesus and his death on the cross and his resurrection on the third day. To begin with, it seems like the gospel writer of Matthew wants to emphasize that Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, is constantly being shaken and afraid. Hear these familiar words that I must tell you I've never read on a Good Friday, but I find them applicable. From Matthew, the 2nd chapter. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise magi from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. Matthew's gospel depicts Jerusalem being frightened and troubled from the very beginning. And then at the crucifixion of Jesus, we read this from the Gospel of Matthew, the 27th chapter. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, torn top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly this man was God's Son." Leaders were terrified. The whole city was frightened. There was darkness. There were unknowns. The earth itself seemed to shake and shift. The ground on which people stood seemed to slide underneath them. I sense, friends, that we are in such a time. And tonight I hope to engage the darkness with you together and to find some encouragement and hope in the midst of the darkness. God does not cause the darkness, but is with us in the midst of darkness. God does not cause suffering, but God is with us in the midst of suffering. Henry Nouwen, one of the great Christians of the 20th century, used to say when people would ask him about help with discerning, he would say, "God only gives us enough light to take the next step. And then when we take that step in trust and with faith, God illumines the next step after that. But God does not illumine the whole path, only one step at a time, and we are all invited into this pilgrimage of trust." Barbara Brown Taylor wrote in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, "I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light. Things that have saved my life over and over again, so that there is really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as I need light." She writes further, "Even when light fades and darkness falls, as it does every single day, in every single life, God does not turn the world over to some other deity. Here is the testimony of faith. Darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day. Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "New life starts in the dark, whether it is a seed in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb. It all starts in the dark." Gerald May, one of the great Christian authors and therapists of the 20th century, wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. A psychiatrist explores the connection between darkness and spiritual growth. And he writes that darkness plays a significant role in those who want to grow in the spiritual life. His premise is that God needs darkness in which to do certain things. And we need darkness in order that we might heal. We need darkness so that our transformation can happen, so that we can become who we are to become. If everything was illumined, if we understood what God was doing in the darkness, we would react in one of two ways, Gerald May says. First, if we knew what God was doing, we would probably try and control it, which would stop the movement. And the second is this: if we knew what God was doing in the darkness in our own lives, we would probably run like hell. We come to the cross of Jesus together. Like Jesus' mother Mary and Jesus' disciple John. And just as they did, we face suffering, pain, unknowns, fear, and darkness. It is here at the cross of Christ that Mary and John experienced the solidarity of suffering, the solidarity of their love for Jesus and their grief for Jesus. It is there that they became family. For from the cross, Jesus says to John, his disciple, "Behold your mother." And Jesus from the cross says to his mother, referring to John, "Behold your son." Friends, let us not run too quickly from the darkness, from the suffering, from the pain, from the unknowns, and from the fears that make this a very dark time. We are invited to trust that God is doing something deep in us, something deep in the liminal space that our world finds itself in now. And it might just be that it is in the darkness and in the fear and grief and suffering of Christ on the cross that we discover family, that we discover true community with one another. And we discover, perhaps for the first time, what is really important in this life. Friends, I'm afraid that this year Good Friday may last quite a while. We are just now in the East Coast, in the New York metro area for sure, coming into the height of this pandemic, where the suffering and the death count will be rising. And it may seem like we are in this darkness for longer than we would wish. We may also discover that we are in Holy Saturday for longer than we wish. Holy Saturday, that time when we understand our losses, we know the griefs, the deaths, but we don't quite know resurrection yet because Sunday has not arrived yet, and we're in this in-between space of Holy Saturday. Friends, we may be in that space for quite a while, but God is with us in that Holy Saturday space. Friends, as followers of Jesus, we are people of hope, because this is the language that God has spoken for billions of years. We see it in the cosmos, and we see it in Jesus, not only in his death and resurrection, but when he was teaching, he would point to the fields and say, lest a grain of wheat falls and dies, it remains but a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Death and resurrection, loss and new hope. That is the language that God has always spoken and that God is speaking even now. After tonight's worship, I invite us to go outside, or to look outside and to look up at the full moon, and perhaps even look for the stars. We who are in isolation may find some comfort in knowing that we are looking up at the same moon and the same sky as one another in the community of faith, but also the same moon and the same sky that all of humankind and all of creation on this earth are looking up at. We may feel isolated in our own homes, but the Creator, the Christ, and the Holy Spirit bind us together always and everywhere. God is with us in the light, and God is with us in the darkness.